Oh my gosh, okay. Hi, my name is Christina Meridia. So I decided to do my topic on racism in the media, so let's just get into it. So racism through general media. The digital realm can be useful for a variety of reasons, but damaging as well as we continue to consume and utilize social media. We are also creating platforms for hate and racism. Racist speech and memes are constantly seen on social media with anonymity being a key factor for these instigators to be able to get away with such acts. Now, people can create various false pages or fake identities to conceal their true characters. I feel like before, maybe like 10 years ago, it was easier to censor and watch out for all the inappropriate content, but now, I mean, even on Twitter, you can see nudity, like racist memes, all of that. So I guess it was easier back then to censor such stuff. Critical race perspective and critical indigenous studies have been used as lenses to further cross examine hate speech and racism on social media. Though the studies are still limited, despite the critical perspectives, more needs to be done to analyze how these platforms produce, magnify, and cater to racist systems and algorithms. Twitter, for example, is highly overrepresented and used as a platform for free speech, meaning more racist and unfavorable opinions. Portrayal and representation, and this is also for black men and women. Representation of black individuals in the media tend to be stereotypes such as a maid, a con artist, or cooks. This is intentionally done to emphasize white dominance in Hollywood and other forms of film presence. This was to portray that black people weren't capable of self ascendancy and were only good to serve or roles of servitude. And by that, we mean that black people were not worthy of having, their own possessions or even being able to own properties or being capable of being in a position of a higher rank or power. Um, Tinder is another app we tend to overlook where representation completely alters one's perspective and swipe. This dating app isn't just for meeting new people with similar interests, but caters to one's desires based off of race. Though we don't like to admit, a lot of people do have racial preference, which I think is completely wrong. Um, and so, yeah, online dating and Tinder hookups are completely motivated and pursued through a racial lens. 100% I agree. I even know people personally who do that. You even see on Grindr in like people's bios, it will say blatantly no blacks, no Asians. It's just awful. Facebook uses a hot or not fashion to determine matches similar to Tinder. Facebook, I guess, has done the same thing now. Moving on, portrayals of Latinos. Latino men and women shared similar roles in Hollywood and in the media as black individuals. Latino women were represented as maids or objectified in a sexual manner. You can always see them as like spicy or sassy or filled with attitude. Latino men were represented as gangbangers, drug traffickers, and domestic violence abusers, as mentioned before. For and similar to black men and women, this representation is to enforce white dominance. So, all of these exaggerated roles and stereotypes of people of color, specifically black and Latino men and women, were to show everything that white people are not. Portrayals of Arabs and Arab Americans. So, though nearly 82% of Arabs in the U.S. are citizens, Arabs are still continued to be portrayed as foreign in the media and in movies. Arab women are usually seen as veiled or exotic figures, while men are seen as billionaires or terrorists. This was a little bit comical to me because there's recent, picture surfacing and going around right now of a white family that actually a politician uploaded this photo of that white family for their Christmas photo, and they all have guns in the photo and they're all smiling and laughing in the photo. Had that been a Muslim family, I think it'd be a whole nother story. So funny how that works. Okay, going on. After 9/11, Arabs were continuously depicted as terrorists in most movies with no other substance to them. The TV show Homeland constantly made it an occurrence to portray Arabs as dangerous as well as portraying a distorted view of the Middle East. And not just Homeland, but even movies in general, such as Fast and Furious, all of these, action movies, they tend to view the Middle East and portray the Middle East as a completely impoverished, war torn area, as if the whole area is like that, and that is not true. Moving on to portrayals of Asian and Asian Americans. So, Asian men were usually made out to be effeminate, foreign, and weak, and this can still be seen like in movies and shows today. The Asian man is, in a high paying position, like a doctor, lawyer, whatever. They do make a lot of money, but they are not masculine. They're seen as, weak. And Asian women were made out to be complete opposite as hypersexualized. They were usually categorized and depicted as either the butterfly or a dragon lady. The butterfly is a more docile, feminine, soft, but still sexualized and to cater to the white man. And the dragon lady is the opposite of that, as a more fiery, fierce, aggressive, but still sexualized as well. Data from 2.4 million interactions on the Facebook dating application revealed that men self identifying as black, white, Latino preferred Asian women. Now, I don't know if there's any studies done on the fetishization of Asian women by white men, but there really should be because it is a frequent occurring instance. And it's kind of weird seeing 60-year-old men with 30 or 40-year-old Asian wives who barely speak any English, and it's almost as if they've been taken advantage of. It's just, maybe I'm just being weird. But, anyways, moving on. Portrayals of Native Americans. In the early years of the U.S., Native Americans were commonly depicted as savages. I have that note about how they were colonized because it's funny that they were seen as savages, given that they did not enslave a whole group of people for hundreds of years, committing and doing unspeakable acts to that group of people for no reason besides the fact that they hated them because of their color of their skin. I'm going to just say that. I'm just going to say that. I don't know how Native Americans are still seen as savages when white people are very animalistic. And that's not to generalize them, but I must say, how? Make it make sense. Anyways, from savages and holding white women and their babies captive, the narrative switched for natives when they became wise men or medicine men. So basically, white people back then, made them out to be savages, but at the same time, they realized their healing powers, their spirituality, and how they knew a lot of different things because of their connections to the earth and nature. So, obviously, when they wanted or needed something from them, they, addressed Native Americans not as savages, but as the wise man. In earlier popular culture, Native American men were stereotyped to serve whites. There's also one end of the range where Native Americans are naked and are the peak of white women's lust and pleasure. So it's either spiritual advice or apathetic loner. Both feed into stereotypes of Native Americans. The same goes for Native American women in terms of dyad. They're either seen as savages or lustful princesses. The constant sexualization of women of color is dangerous and damaging altogether. On one hand, she is a noble and erotic, dedicated to her white lover, and on the other, she is a squaw and has sex both with white men and Native American Indian men. So it's like either way, she's still sexualized, and that goes for all women of color, no matter, what other substance, they have to them. It's ultimately the objectification of them that is seen. They're never seen in like a higher power or a higher rank, such as a CEO, a lawyer, a surgeon, an engineer, a doctor. But 9 times out of 10, a white woman will have that role in movies and stories and shows. My little rant, but moving on. New media presentations. In 2013, Americans surpassed online television viewing for the first time. By 2016, Americans spent more than 10 hours playing video games, tablets, phones, and other technological devices. I don't know where we would be without our phones and laptops. Studies of video games have revealed consistent stereotyping. Latinos are overrepresented in sports games. Asians are almost exclusively portrayed in fighting games, and Arabs are typically portrayed as targets of violence. Video game user increased by 91%. Instead of passive watching, viewers engage in these games, making them susceptible to more stereotypes. Researchers argue that the interactive nature of the games not only enhance stereotypes, but can counteract them, meaning that video game designers create a more realistic setting in the game, leading to a creation of urban spaces that are dominated by African American and Latino men. By this, they're creating a more realistic setting and environment of neighborhoods and towns that are, occupied predominantly by black men and Latino men. And then in these, settings, they're also feeding into the stereotypes by having the black man hijacking the car. It can never be a white man, right? Because whoever heard of a white man hijacking a car? Or the Latino man with a gun in his hand, I guess holding somebody at gunpoint in these games. Social media. Though there has been research done on race hate speech in social media, a variety of it has been conducted by white researchers who rarely acknowledge the positionality of the authors, which risks reinforcing colorblind ideologies within the field. This is not to say that white people cannot understand racism and discrimination, but they cannot come from a certain place to understand such concepts because they have never experienced discrimination and racism themselves. Though they might have experienced some type of discrimination in terms of a lesser manner, nothing to the extent of what a black man or woman might experience. And then this then leads to inaccurate research and filings. From this, there is a lead of malpractices within social media and can lead to more significant power imbalances, such as racial ideology of how white people are presented in a positive manner in our media. Because these white researchers are, creating these different findings and studies based off of like their own experience and what they are seeing, they're not actually coming from a place, as I just said, of understanding truly where discrimination lies, because they themselves have not really experienced it. Videos such as I Am Not Trayvon Martin have the power to sway and spread message fast. But while there is the counteract power, there's also easy reproduction of racism, hate speech, more. So yes, we can have and utilize social media as a way to spread positive manners and shed light on, on topics such as BLM and social activism and policy change for black communities. There's also, there's equal space to spread and contribute to racism as well, unfortunately. Media images and racial inequalities. So pop culture representations of people of color have changed over time, but the racial implications have stayed the same by continuing to propagate old ideologies. The representation of black men in the 17th century was lazy and served to justify slavery. Meanwhile, now the ideologies have changed to where black men are represented as thugs and drug dealers to justify the mass incarceration of black men today. So though we've came a long way from the 17th century, we really haven't, because black men have just went from being lazy to now thugs and drug dealers. Like, where is the difference, or where has the improvement been made in their depictions? For black women, the earlier 17th century depiction was a sexually depraved woman, and the current representation has altered to hoe and sexually mischievous to justify cuts in social services for primarily inner cities, mainly black population, by deeming black women as poor and unworthy of any type of aid. This is honestly really sad, because more than not, 90% of time you see in movies, shows, the black woman, the black family, they're always in a state of either poverty or struggling, or just in a state of like, falling apart. They can never ever be, depicted as engineers, as doctors, surgeons in a higher, rank or in a higher position for whatever reason. Like, I literally know more black engineers than I do any other. Like, it baffles me. Anyways, moving on. Use of controlled images. The use of controlled images also contributes to active racism by depicting black men and women in ways that are not accurate at all. Throughout U.S. history, blacks have been represented as incongruous, I hope I'm saying that right, physically resistant and hypersexual. By exaggerating them in that sense, they are trying to define what people are not. I did mention and emphasize this earlier in the presentation as well, that all these, all these false representations and stereotypes of, black men and women and people of color are just to show what white people are not, basically, and to constantly emphasize that white people are positive, are good, are in this like higher standard than anybody else. These same false illustrations are efforts to justify rampant inequalities, period. Race, class, and gendered media images. From the previous point relating to this one, controlled images argue that the media produces various representations based off of class, gender, and race, and gender-specific delineations of Black individuals in popular culture. These illustrations also sway individuals on dating apps such as Tinder, making it harder for Black women and men to have matches. Arab women are rarely portrayed as terrorists, and men are almost always the perpetrators, not the victims of gendered violence. Implications from racism in media. From these false portrayals of people of color in our society, it often makes it harder for these individuals to be looked past their stereotypes. Institutionalized racism is already extremely difficult, specifically for Black individuals to escape from, and the media is a contributing factor. One major characteristic emphasized on individuals of color is that they lack the depth of white characters. This could be resolved if media and Hollywood actually had more accurate representations of people of color instead of these false exemplifications. Conclusions. These stereotypical portrayals we see in the media today were not created by the media, but created through our history decades and centuries ago. Obviously, racism wasn't like spread and created overnight through Instagram. These are like concepts that have been around since the beginning of time, all because one group of people did not like another group of people based off of their skin color. How stupid does that sound when we say it out loud? Anyways, the media is just another outlet to promote, produce, and profit racism. We live in a capitalistic society, and that itself profits off of racism, unfortunately. Though there is a question on if media should be held, I'm sorry, that's a typo, solely responsible for racism and justification of these reproductions of stereotypes, I think racism is started and taught at home. If I can be honest, yes, we can hold social media accountable for contributing and encouraging racism, but we cannot solely just blame that platform itself. I think racism is definitely taught at home, and the people around you, your friends, they're all like major influences to how you think, and you just have to really reconsider who's around you to make sure you're not swayed by other people's opinions. The media should work harder to counteract stereotypical views of people of color in our society. Most definitely, like, again, social media can be held accountable, but we are our own people at the end of the day, and we have our own, mind, and we should utilize that and make the right decisions. Thank you so much.